Professor Brian Shoesmith, Chairman of the Research Committee, who is also the Advisors of Strategic Planning ULAB Board of Trustees, to kindly accompany the Chief Guest to the stage and take their seat.
No matter how good IBA is within Bangladesh, it is unknown. I think most of you know by now that research and publication are two different things. What passes for publication or research-based publication in Bangladesh is really wouldn't stand up, against any international yardstick. And that is also backed up by the fact that very few of our articles in so-called peer-reviewed journals are referred. The referral rate for Bangladeshi articles are abysmally low. We want to be known as a regional player, and we cannot do that without having a research credentials. So I would like to thank all the people who submitted the 11 submissions and the 19 faculty members who are behind these 11 submissions. I really thank you because you've played a historical part in this, a very important role by putting in the submissions. The process itself has been steered through by very ably, first by Dr. Daniel Sabet, and then Dr. Brian Shoesmith, Nadia, Dr. Zahir. And, we've come to this stage. We've looked at the research. We've honed it down, streamlined the research questions, looked at the scope, and particularly worked with the individual faculty to rationalize their budgets. I'd like to say that although, we have a definitive size of research fund, I know personally that the Board of Trustees would always be very, very open. If there's one budget that they would be willing to extend or increase, that would be the research budget, right? Because, you can't imagine how much more fame and influence we would have through research than from any other kind of activity at the university. And I'm very pleased to know that, our chief guest university, independent university, is also very soon going to go through the similar process. And if all the other universities in the private sector do it, we will change the whole landscape of universities in Bangladesh. And something that the public universities have not been able to do will be done by the private university sector. And I think the first university to appear in the top 500 list on the global institutions will be from the private sector. I know that, because I can't see it differing any other way. So having said that, again, it's really a personal pleasure for me to welcome Omar. I don't know how many of you know that he's actually a very close friend of mine. We just went on a holiday recently to Cox's Bazar. I know him since the age of 9. So we've been friends and school friends since since class 3. And it's amazing that these two school friends ended up being vice chancellors of two universities. Who would have bet on that ever happening? So so it's really a pleasure for me to always interact with him. We exchange notes because in a way I think Independent and ULAB have a lot in common. We are both focused on liberal arts, and we're focused on research, and we're always thinking about how to make a difference in the way things are done right now. So Omar is, the other thing I forgot to tell you, that he was the first boy of my class. And I was the second boy, but I was way below, he was first by a huge margin. So he is, apart from being the Vice Chancellor of Independent, he's also the Professor of Demography and Dean of the School of Public Health and Director of the Center for Health, Population and Development at Independent. Before that, he was an Associate Professor of Epidemiology and Demography at Harvard University and a Research Fellow in Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. So he's also a doctor he's a medical doctor, he's a psychiatrist, or a shrink, as you saw. So he's a VC by day and a shrink by the evening or the weekend. He remains an adjunct faculty member in demography at the Department of Global Health and Population at the Harvard School of Public Health. Dr. Rahman completed his undergrad in biochemical sciences from Harvard College in 1979, followed by his MD, which is the medical degree from Northwestern University Medical School in 1983. Subsequently, he received his Master's in Public Health, or MPH, in Health Policy and Management from the Harvard School of Public Health, and his DSc in Epidemiology from the Harvard School of Public Health in 1990. Dr. Rahman trained in psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and is a US board certified psychiatrist. So if you have any personal problems, you know where to go, right? He's the author of multiple peer-reviewed articles on a variety of health and population-related subjects and has edited 3 books and several chapters. His current research interests are higher education policy in the developing world, professional out-migration and impact on homeland development, health policy in developing countries, public health approaches to mental health in the developing world, social and kin networks and their impact on mental and physical health, and gender differences in aging and development. So I can think of no one more qualified to come here, give out these certificates, and to inspire both the recipients of these awards and to the general students, general faculty. So please join me in giving a very warm round of applause for our chief guest. So it's my distinct pleasure now to invite Omar to the podium to address all of you. Thank you.
This is really a distinct pleasure and a privilege for me to be here today. I must say that when Imran invited me, the first thing that struck me was that you've stolen a bit of our thunder, because we at IUB were planning to start a very similar program, and we are still hoping to do that. And I'm very pleased that I've been beaten in this by my old friend, Professor Imran Rahman, and his university. Because as he mentioned, in many ways, I think that ULAB and IUB are kindred spirits. I am well known in IUB for always bringing my daughters into any speech, and I always tell them that they inspire me often by their very laconic remarks about whatever I'm planning to do. So last night, just like every time else, whenever I have something to say, I told them that, Imran uncle's invited me to give this speech, and they said, what are you going to talk about? And I said, research. And the first thing my 13-year-old says was, how boring. Why would you want to talk about research? And I said, what do you think research is? And I have a 16-year-old, she's Zoya, and Zubaida is 16. And they both said, well, it's something that you're forced to do because you have to hand in an assignment. And it's a lot of work, and they don't give you enough time to do it. And it's just something that you spend a huge amount of time looking up stuff and writing it down. So I said, don't you enjoy it when you're asked to do it? And they said, not really. But they thought it was enormously funny, because I said that, I have to do a little bit of homework about this. And my older daughter said, well, you're going to research on doing research. And both of them thought it was enormously funny that I was doing that, sort of a pun on the word research. But it got me thinking about the larger issues of what research is about, and why young people don't have a positive impression of it. And I must say that it bothered me that both my children, who I think are very intellectually curious, somehow or the other aren't able to see the connection between their curiosity, which they indulge in, a lot by themselves. They're always looking up things and telling me things in fact, in the world of Google, parental authority is a very tenuous thing, because every time I say something, immediately my daughter, especially my younger daughter, will say, well, let me Google it and see if that's true. So, you no longer have the time that when your dad says something, that it's obviously something that is definitive. But it struck me that, intellectual curiosity is something that is so intrinsic to all of us. We all want to know about things. And so I started thinking a little bit about, what does it mean to say research? What is research? And I did do a little bit of homework, and I did look up a whole set of things, and I have to admit, perhaps it says something about me, that I found it actually quite enjoyable, that I started, I looked up something and that referred me to something else. And, I am still of the age where I think the internet is magical. The fact that I can sit somewhere and look up something and go along and go into it more deeper and wider and find out lots of things, and it's all on in our fingertips, and just this little machine here allows me this window into this amazing world where I can find out things. As an anecdote, my daughters think that their father is very strange, because I once looked up how to boil a hot dog, and I looked up 10 different references about it. But, to me, that's also emblematic of research. Research, ultimately, and this is my distillation of a large body of literature. There is, interestingly enough, quite a lot of serious work done about the epistemology of research. But I think, to bring it into a more practical vein, what I would say if someone asked me what is research, I would say two things. The first is that it's an answer to a question. All research starts off with a question. And it could be about how to boil hot dogs, or about what is the Higgs boson and why is it important, or what did Rabindranath mean when he said XYZ. All right? And I'm using examples from a whole variety of disciplines. The second answer to that, so that's one answer, that it's motivated by a question, and it's the search for an answer to a question that you frame. The second answer that I have is that it's a story. All research is telling a story. It's a story which is very structured. It starts off with a question. It has a beginning, a middle, an end. But as I tell my colleagues and younger colleagues, that look, when you write a paper, you need to think of your paper as a story. What is the story that you're trying to tell? Whether it's about literature or music or about physics or biology, there is a story here, and your job is to tell that story as effectively as you can to your audience, and you have to pitch the story depending on the audience. To different audiences, you're going to tell the story a little bit differently. But there is underlying all of this a story. And your ability as a researcher to communicate this story is what makes you a good researcher. All right? And, it's interesting when you think about these things. I started thinking, okay, what are the questions that people ask? And it turns out that most of them start with a W. Why? What? Who? Where? When? The only non-W question that I could come up with is how. So let me give you a few examples. And it's not really a mnemonic, but that's one way to think about it. There are all these W-centric words. Why? Why are there more suicides in May than in any other month? It's an area from my field, which is interesting, because May is spring, when the temperature, especially in the colder climates, improves. And usually people used to think that most suicides would be in winter. I'm just giving a small example of an area that I know. Why do birds fly south? Why is, the whole, I'm talking about, business-related subjects. Why are there asset bubbles or housing booms and bust? So that's the why. The what is, of course, in some ways, I think, much more central to the humanities. What is the meaning of life? From philosophy, that's a big part of philosophy. What is the meaning of love? What do we mean by dreams? The interpretation of dreams was a very famous book written by Sigmund Freud, and is still referenced and talked about. What is the meaning of poetry? I'm using examples from a variety of disciplines to make what may seem like an obvious point, that research is generic, it is irrespective of discipline. And the reason I say that, because there's such a preponderance of emphasis on scientific research, that oftentimes people seem to conflate the two, that science and research go together. But in reality, research is about every field, every discipline. Any question that you ask is a researchable question. Who is another very important question. A lot of social sciences is about the who. Who is most affected? Who is least affected? Is it women? Is it the poor? Is it, and I'll have to tell you one of my favorite sort of lines about social science research. It's a disparaging comment made by a physicist friend of mine who, when I was trying to describe to him what I do, he said that it seems to me that social scientists spend an inordinate amount of time